Okay, we are looking at the life of Elijah, and this is the fourth installment, and I'm calling it The Showdown. Although the long-awaited showdown will be covered in part 2, I do want to, don't tell me that you're doing this, but we want to get through some scripture today that leads up to the showdown, and we'll cover that in part 2. But if you want to kind of hit the fast forward, if you don't have time to catch everything, get toward the end, leading up to the showdown. But feel free to join me for this too. So remember, Elijah's been living with a widow and her son. God provided them with a never-ending supply of flour and olive oil, and so a miracle has occurred. After that, the widow's son died, but through Elijah, God has brought him back to life. So let's continue Elijah's story in 1 Kings 18, starting with verse 1. After a long time, in the third year, it'll be the third year of the drought, the word of the Lord came to Elijah. Go and present yourself to Ahab, that's the king, and I will send rain on the land. So Elijah went to present himself to Ahab. So just imagine being in a drought for over 2 years. You know, we live in here in the Midwest, so you know how devastating that would be to the farmers. God now tells Elijah it's time, but God's not going to just turn on the faucets. Remember, he's wanting the people to understand who he is and who Baal isn't. So the rains won't come until there's absolute, indisputable, irrefutable clarity who withheld the rain and who will give it. So it's time for Elijah to begin the next step of God's plan. Now the famine was severe in Samaria, and Ahab had summoned Obadiah, who was in charge of his palace. Obadiah was a devout believer in the Lord. That's critical. He was a believer in the one true God. While Jezebel was killing off the Lord's prophets, Obadiah had taken 100 prophets and hidden them in 2 caves, 50 in each, and had supplied them with food and water. Ahab had said to Obadiah, "Go through the land to all the springs and valleys. Maybe we can find some grass to keep the horses and mules alive so we will not have to kill any of our animals." So they divided the land they were to cover, Ahab going in one direction and Obadiah in another. As Obadiah was walking along, Elijah met him. Obadiah recognized him, bowed down to the ground, and said, "Is it really you, my lord Elijah?" "Yes," he replied. "Go tell your master Elijah is here." Remember, recall that Elijah is a wanted man, wanted by the king of Israel, King Ahab. So what's Obadiah's reaction? "What have I done wrong," asked Obadiah, "that you are handing your servant over to Ahab to be put to death? As surely as the Lord your God lives, there is not a nation or kingdom where my master has not sent someone to look for you. And whenever a nation or kingdom claimed you were not there, he made them swear they could not find you. But now you tell me to go to my master and say, 'Elijah is here.' I don't know where the Spirit of the Lord may carry you when I leave you. If I go and tell Ahab, and he doesn't find you, he will kill me." So do you see his problem? We've heard that phrase, killing the messenger. He's got the problem of killing the messenger, doesn't he? The next few verses don't really tell us anything new, but let's look at them. "Yet I, your servant," Obadiah is saying, "have worshipped the Lord since my youth. Haven't you heard, my Lord, what I did while Jezebel was killing the prophets of the Lord? I hid 100 of the Lord's prophets in 2 caves, 50 in each, and supplied them with food and water. And now you tell me to go to my master and say, 'Elijah is here, he will kill me.'" And here's something new. Elijah said, "As the Lord Almighty lives, whom I serve, I will surely present myself to Ahab today." So that's apparently the assurance that Obadiah needed. He went off to tell the king. Elijah's part in this part of the story is pretty simple. He's been directed by God and is ready to speak to the king. So it's Obadiah's part in the story that I find more interesting. By the way, this isn't the same Obadiah who has a book in the Old Testament. So here, Obadiah is a good, God-fearing man working for the evil Ahab and the evil Jezebel. It's a bold thing he's done protecting 100 prophets of Yahweh. When Jezebel is hell-bent on killing prophets, he's protecting them. You can bet she wouldn't take kindly to what Obadiah has been doing. Not to mention problems for Obadiah in trying to feed and water these men during the drought. We might dismiss the good Obadiah's been doing for the prophets and instead focus on how terrible it is he's working for such evil people, or criticize him for not standing up to the king and queen. All I can say is, isn't it possible that he's completely in God's will? He's being used by God to protect the prophets. Then there's the objection to Obadiah's reluctance to fulfill Elijah's request. We might be thinking, wow, he just doesn't have the faith and obedience like Elijah. But to that I say, give the guy a break. He's risking his life daily protecting the prophets. Out of the blue, Elijah comes to town with this request. Wouldn't you or I have kind of some of the same concerns? And not to disrespect Elijah's perseverance and bravery and his obedience. But one thing can't be certain, but has the king been anxious to find Elijah to kill him? If it were at Jezebel, I'd say yes. But it's quite possible the king would want to convince Elijah, get him to say the word to bring his rains. So for this part of Elijah's story, in terms of risking one's life, Elijah's risk is less than Obadiah's. Now let's pick up on the story in verse 16. So Obadiah went to meet Ahab and told him, and Ahab went to meet Elijah. When he saw Elijah, he said to him, "Is that you, you troubler of Israel?" "I have not made trouble for Israel," Elijah replied, "but you and your father's family have. You have abandoned the Lord's commands and have followed the Baals." That's plural. Baals refers to local idols of Baal. So over 3 years have gone by, and the two meet up. And I read this, and it seems like kind of a pretty lame exchange. That's the way it struck me. It's like a couple of kids. "Hey, troublemaker of Israel, I'm not the troublemaker, you are." We know that Ahab's name calling is false. Elijah is correct that it's the king and his predecessors who have done wrong. They've condoned and even encouraged idolatry in Israel. So I can see why Elijah didn't want to let the king get away with this blame game. However, Elijah wasn't there to trade accusations, so he didn't give Ahab a chance to counter. Instead, he makes a command to Ahab. "Now summon the people from all over Israel to meet me on Mount Carmel, and bring the 450 prophets of Baal and the 400 prophets of Asherah who eat at Jezebel's table." So Ahab sent word throughout all Israel and assembled the prophets on Mount Carmel. Why would King Ahab be so agreeable to Elijah? The first thing to remember is that the rains have not come. By now the king has to believe Elijah has the upper hand here. Elijah said the drought wouldn't end until he said so. The king doesn't know yet what specifically Elijah has planned, but so far things seem to be stacked in the king's favor. For one thing, look at the map here. The location looks pretty neutral. That's my dog wanting to get out, so I'm going to end it here pretty soon. This is the area right in here, Mount Carmel. That's kind of a topographical map. It's up on the top. You can look for miles in all directions. It's on the northwest edge of Israel. It's also near the southwest edge of Baal country. All this up here is Baal country, where they worship Baal. In fact, Mount Carmel, which is where they're meeting, was thought to be where Baal lived. So whatever was going down Baal believers had the home advantage. Add to that, Elijah was suggesting he bring 850 prophets if you add them all up, of Baal and Asherah. That's an 850 to 1 advantage. I'm thinking the king's thinking, hey, this is a good deal. Let's get this over with. God is putting the next step of his plan in motion. Elijah's preparation, his training phase is now over. And what was the training? To have complete trust in God. It's time for the showdown, which we'll look at in part 2.